Let's define meditation just a little bit. So when we talk about meditation in this episode, what are we exactly talking about here?
Yeah, it's an easily misunderstood uh idea or concept and so meditation as the way I define it is really a collection of exercises that train mindfulness. And so meditation can look a lot of different ways, and there's a bunch of traditional ways to do it, but there's also a lot of active and non-traditional ways. And we'll get into that, I think, a little bit further on. But the bottom line is it's a collection of exercises. Just like you could think of if you're going into the weight room and you're doing pull specific stuff, well, you could do pull-ups, you could do rows, you could do a deadlift or a curl, right? There's a whole different suite of things you can do to challenge that type of activity, and you're going to get stronger for it. And so it's likewise, we can use a bunch of different types of meditation to address specific issues around where you're practicing mindfulness and when it's going to be most helpful. And so to get a little bit further in, then what is mindfulness? And mindfulness is a type of attention. And the type of attention is a present moment attention. So you're bringing your conscious awareness to what's happening here and now. And then there's a second piece that's really important, which is there's a non-judgmental or compassionate attitude that you take, a stance that you take to everything that comes up when you're here and now. And the reason that those two are important, right, is because anybody who's practiced meditation out there has recognized that when you get to the present moment, there's often two different categories that things land in. You either really like them and you want to hold on to them, right? Or there's stuff that you don't really like and you want to get rid of it. And so the example is, if you're feeling nice and relaxed and you're going like, ooh, this is a really good meditation session, like, all right, how can I keep this around? Or the opposite, right? You're sitting and you're breathing and you're following your breath and you go, oh man, there's a little wiggle in my back and that kind of hurts, or my knee starts to, and you're like, ooh, what do I do to get rid of it? And that's really a function of judgment. Whether it's good or bad, I'm now judging. And so the idea here is we actually take one step back or go one layer up above the judgment, and whatever arrives is here. So I bring my attention to the present moment, and then whatever shows up, I can allow to be here without having to say it's good or bad. I want more of it or I want less of it.
Hmm.
And so when you pair those two things together, there's a bunch of really cool stuff that happens. And so this starts to get a little bit into why meditation. And I think from a big picture perspective, what we're interested in here is that when we think about why meditation, there's really two jobs that performers have, right? We have to get better as fast as we can. And then we need to be able to integrate those lessons that we've learned into performance, right? We have to be able to do the stuff we've learned in practice under pressure. And for either of those two jobs that we have, being present and allowing our present moment reality to emerge, right? That's a key to getting better, and it's the key to performing our best. And so if it'd be helpful, I can unpack that a little bit further in terms of the motivation and why that's useful, or you can steer us wherever else you want.
Yeah, that present-minded focus is something I preach to everybody I work with, and here's why. There might be a time and place for an athlete to be thinking about the past, something that has already happened, or to be thinking about the future, something that they plan to do or want to do, or something that hasn't happened yet. But most of the time, it is not helpful to be thinking in the past or future if you're trying to have your best shift of the game or trying to have your best performance. If you're trying to have your best performance, you want to be in the present moment most of the time. Because what ends up happening usually is when athletes are stuck thinking in the past too often, they experience frustration or regret or guilt. And when they're stuck thinking about the future, stuff that hasn't happened yet, or stuff that they're worried about happening or not happening, that facilitates a sense of anxiety and worry. And this is going to make you a bit more shaky. You're going to start overthinking all the stuff that people listening to this podcast are probably trying to manage. So that's why being able to train this skill of mindfulness-based meditation can end up resulting in more present-minded thinking during these games when you have so much pressure and when it's really easy not to be focused on the present moment. So that's kind of where a lot of my focus comes from, meditation, in how I see it translate to performance. Is there
Yeah,
maybe any piece that I'm missing there or anything to add?
Well, I just wanted to, reiterate what you said is that time traveling is actually a very powerful tool, right? As humans, we have that superpower to be able to go to the past or go to the future. Right? But I try and explain to people, and this is actually really timely because I'm getting a new puppy this afternoon.
Oh,
But that our mind is like a puppy, and right, so left to its own devices, it's going to do basically whatever it wants to do. And what that means is, like you pointed to, you're sitting on the bench in between shifts, and if you had a great shift, you might be stuck in the past thinking about, oh man, that was awesome, and like I dangled that guy, right? I just scored, I set another person up, I shut that play down. But that can also then springboard us forward and go like, well, I start to really grasp, what do I need to do to keep this going? I'm worried that it's going to disappear. So now I have a little bit of this grasping and then this worry that it's not going to keep going. And likewise, if I had a bad shift, now I'm dragged into the past and I'm struggling back there and I'm thinking about, right, but it's consuming a lot of my energy, which means that I can't then get back out on the ice and have my present moment attention and be grounded in my body when it's time to perform my best. And so I often talk with athletes about making sure that you schedule your time travel, right? So when it's time to review practice or review a game, right, to do it with some boundaries. I'm going to sit down and for the next 15 minutes, I'm going to follow some structure to journal or evaluate. Right? I'll do my reflection. And then when I close that out, if I'm laying down in bed later that night and my mind starts to wander, ooh, that shift or that, and this was good or that was bad, you've already done the work, right? You can let it go. And likewise, the goal setting, that future oriented, the planning, right? If all we're doing is planning constantly, then we're not present and we can't take a step forward from where we actually are. And what ends up happening when we time travel too much is that we stop being connected to our present moment reality. And there's a lot of danger there because if you think about it, this is really the only place that we can move forward, right? The only place I can take a step forward from is where my 2 feet are in this exact minute. But what we end up doing is going to what I like to call fantasy land, which is I wish it were this way, or things would be easier, or I'd get more playing time if, or, and you can't make progress from there. But if our mind is stuck in that space, we keep convincing ourselves that if only things were a little bit different, then we'd be able to get closer to the things that we really want, whether it's consistency or it's moving up a level or it's more playing time. And so I really appreciate you brought up this idea that presence isn't the only thing you want always. There's a good time to be in the past. There's a good time to be in the future. But when it's time to be your best, we need to be in our bodies and we need to be present to the experience we're having.
I think it's facilitating great performance when an athlete can think back to a prior shift and gain confidence from it or learn from the shift rather than have this frustration or guilt. And likewise, looking to the future when they can plan, when they can change their plan according to what's going on in the game in the present to change what might happen in the future. This is where it facilitates performance. But like you said, most of the time we want to be in the present moment. I think we've been talking about how meditation can help you be more present-minded focused, which is awesome. But there's a second part of meditation that I find very important is this awareness training. So part of meditation, this practice that we're going to dive into a bit more here is maybe sitting and focusing on one of your senses or going for a walk and noticing all the sounds that you hear. Once you eventually become distracted, because that is a guarantee as you practice meditation, you will become distracted. And that's when you non-judgmentally come back to what you're focusing on. You're improving this skill of awareness of noticing, oh, hey, I was distracted. Now, maybe you were distracted thinking about what to make for dinner or all the work or schoolwork you have to do that night. Maybe that lasted 30 seconds. And then you non-judgmentally come back to what you're focusing on. And then maybe after a couple of weeks of meditating consistently, this 30 seconds changes to 10 seconds. And you catch yourself much more quickly about being unfocused and distracted from what you should be thinking about. Now, let's take this into a game setting where you have all this pressure. You're obviously going to be overthinking at some points where you're distracted and not focused on performance facilitating cues. By practicing meditation consistently for a good amount of time, you can decrease the amount of time that it takes for you to notice that you are thinking ineffectively, that your mental game is not helping you play your best. So you're going to spend less time thinking about performance damaging cues because your awareness is training you to catch when you don't have this effective focus. So it goes hand in hand, but this meditation will improve your awareness of when you're thinking ineffectively so that you can reel yourself in to the present moment, to effective cues to think about to facilitate performance.